actually thinks their government is going to phase out defined benefit for public sector? Not many of you. And then you go so far as to say is, in terms of pension reform, you have a situation that if we go to La Belle France, you have retirement being proposed from 62 to 64. Astonishing that in one of the first world countries in the world, it's still actually only 62. But you have a situation where they're attempting to go to 64, and the reality is that has pretty much brought down not one but two French prime ministers, and has rendered Macron's presidency pretty much toast, whatever the French word for toast is, pain brouillé, I think it is. And that's the practical reality. Pension reform of public sector, raising state pension age, is politically exceptionally unpopular. Older people clearly vote. It is really, really difficult. And if you are lucky enough to have some spare time during your time in London, I strongly urge you to go to Parliament Square, and you'll see a burnt patch in the middle of Parliament Square opposite the House of Commons, because a minister was mad enough to decide that they were going to raise women's state pension age from 60 to 65. You may think this is entirely logical in a state of equality, but the practical reality is that when I proposed this and then tried to implement this, about 1 million people called the Women Against State Pension Increase, known as WASPIs, they decided to campaign robustly against that, and I required police protection not once, not twice, but 9 times during my tenure as a pensions minister, I should say. And then my favourite bit about it is, my mum rang me up and said, "Darling, I've just seen you on the news." I went, "Well, that's a bad reason, I'm afraid, is because there's a large amount of ladies of 60 years of age who are campaigning against me and my policy to equalise state pension, and they've just burnt an effigy of me in Parliament Square. And they took several straw bales, apologies if you don't understand this in English, packed me into a suit, put me on a pole, and then apparently I went up quite quickly. And burnt well. And my mother saw on the news me burning and a picture of her son live. She felt still live, she wasn't quite sure if the bloke in the suit was me. And saying, under a commentary of this is what Middle England thinks of pension reform. It's difficult, is the simple point. It brings down governments. It is extraordinarily hard. We will talk about the nature of the reforms that are existing. We have our Dutch colleagues here. Obviously, we've learnt, and I met with my opposite number from the Netherlands, that there is something called CDC, which we've introduced here, which when I first introduced it, genuinely 3 men and a dog turned up to a meeting on CDC. Now we have over 20 multi-employer CDCs being brought forward in this country, wholesale reform that genuinely is game-changing.
So we now are in a situation where we have automatic enrolment in the UK. I think we pretty much take it for granted. It's a very popular policy. If you ask people in the UK, they will generally say they think auto-enrolment's a good thing. It feels like it's always been part of the UK system, but it really hasn't. 20 years ago, when we were doing the thinking about the pension reforms that became the auto-enrolment reforms, there were millions of people in this country who had no pension saving at all. And the system really was not working well. I mean, this really was one of the most successful policy reforms, certainly, I think, that we've seen in a very long time. The 2012 reforms absolutely transformed the pension system. So before they came in, about 4 out of 10 private sector workers were saving in a pension. Post the 2012 reforms, that's doubled. That's about 8 out of 10 now. Millions of people are now saving in a pension who were not otherwise saving. Pension savings become normalised. It's become culturally normal. Most people now have a pension. Most people expect to have a pension. When the reforms were proposed, I can't tell you how many people told me that the whole thing was going to be a disaster, that most people would opt out. If you polled people, if you did surveys, the surveys would tell you that most people were going to opt out. The behaviour that we saw was very different to that. actually opt-out rates were very low. Your young people and your people who had lower earnings, opt-out rates were much lower. Again, very counterintuitive and not what we predicted. Most impressive that these reforms have endured so well. They were brought in under a Labour government. They were implemented under a coalition government. They were developed still further through a Conservative government, and now we see a new pensions commission being set up under a Labour government. They have endured. When reforms survive over time, and when they can survive that amount of change, I think that you know that they're really built to last.
And what's happened in Estonia in 2019, they allowed to withdraw people before the retirement. Now, the similar thing might appear also in our system, that people, when some kind of populistic type of the politicians are coming, they are starting, to say that maybe for you it's wise, take the money out, because in a short-term perspective you could do something, but not all the politicians thinking in this long term that what would be in the future. So some kind of possibilities to withdraw is starting to appear in the DC schemes, which I believe it's not so much possible in defined benefits type of the scheme. So this is some kind of also the challenge we have. But I would say overall, I know that the time is also a little bit over timing, so it's a little bit to some kind of go to the conclusion. So I would say that this supplementary system were introduced, and during these 20 years they are doing quite well. They, the assets under management are increasing, or the amounts in the pension fund participants are increasing. The regulations or the fee structure, which maybe it's not so comfortable for us, is let's say it's pushed to be decreased, and it's decreasing. Yeah, the only one thing that this adequacy, the amounts are too small, which we are contributing. Another thing, it's still which are under discussion, that we don't have so much employer-based pension plans in Central Eastern Europe. So I think it's also for us to let's say, to going forward to have some kind of more employer-sponsored type of the funds, because usually now it's funded by personal contributions and supported by some kind of state's contributions, and not somehow to slip on these populistic type of the things that allow people somehow to withdraw before retirement and to try to earn some kind of short-term, things for the politicians, but not to create or destroy the long-term value in the future.
Oui, merci Nicolas. Donc tu anticipes sur le dernier point que je voulais aborder, donc tu es très fort. Ce qu'il faut noter, c'est que on pourrait penser que les fonds de pension, Agirc Arrco, ont un horizon de placement qui est très court. Ce n'est pas le cas. Je répétais 15 ans minimum tout à l'heure. Ça veut dire que la part des actions dans les portefeuilles, en l'occurrence Agirc Arrco, les actions, c'est 30% minimum. Peu de private equity, sauf Olivier Rousseau quelque part, et il va nous dire, sauf pour les FRR qui est au-dessus de la moyenne, c'est pas encore dans la culture. J'évoquais tout à l'heure Aliénor d'Aquitaine, la rente pour les veuves. En France, on a gardé le goût des rentes, et en Grande-Bretagne, on a pris, parce que qu'est-ce qu'ils venaient faire les Anglais en France à ce moment-là? Ils venaient chercher déjà du vin, etc., entre autres, et eux, ils ont gardé un sens du commerce et du développement économique qu'on n'a pas. Je voudrais dire deux choses sérieuses après.
Okay, après on s'arrête. Okay, let me translate. So we're saying that, that first pillar, that private sector first pillar portion of the system called Agirc Arrco, it's pay-as-you-go, but they have a reserve, right? So it's not real-time pay-as-you-go. There's a buffer, which represents, let's say, a year-ish plus of money. And it's a lot of money, even though it's less than the Anglo-Saxon Dutch model. And roughly a third of that is into equity, European equity. And he's aware of the fact that it's less than in Anglo-Saxon or Northern European countries, where the portion of equity tends to be bigger.
Précisons quand même par ailleurs que le taux d'épargne en France est un des plus élevés d'Europe. souvent sur l'épargne, j'allais dire, de court terme, hein, la caisse d'épargne, des choses comme ça. Néanmoins, la plupart des épargnants français ont pris conscience de deux choses. Investir évidemment dans la recherche, on ne fait pas assez, mais depuis quelque temps, depuis 2 ans, nous étions à la réunion du FMI à Marrakech il y a un peu plus de 2 ans,
Yes.
13 octobre.
Yes.
Date dont on se souvient, 7 octobre, dont on se souvient. Et les questions de financement de la défense arrivent d'une manière mieux structurée, et tant pour le crédit que les fonds propres. Et donc, c'est-à-dire, comme en Grande-Bretagne, je ne dis pas que c'est un élément qui peut permettre améliorer la confiance dans le système, mais que le système soit lié à l'économie, à la réalité du monde, c'est un élément de la confiance, je pense, important. Hein. Donc, c'est ton... Et tu traduis en disant juste bla,
Voilà.
bla.
On s'arrête là, je traduis, et there are two ideas, concluding remarks by Jean-Pierre. The first is there's a saving grace for France. And it's also the same saving grace you have in countries like, for example, Italy or Taiwan. Is if you look only at the narrowly defined pension assets, pension system, and compare it to Britain, America, Australia, the French look miserable in terms of assets. You would think, oh my God, it's ridiculous. But the saving grace is there's a lot of money in life insurance savings. A lot, much more than London or Canberra or Sydney. And that's partly, it's not enough, but it's partly a compensation. So if you rebase, if you take into account all the savings which the French middle class and even lower middle class makes in these fiscally advantageous, in Belgium you have it too, assurance vie, life insurance, then it's not that bad. If you add to that real estate, the French situation or the Belgian or the Italian looks not stellar, but let's say okay-ish. Okay. Second idea, and concluding remark by Jean-Pierre, we were together at the IMF World Bank Summit in Marrakech on October 13, and that was right after the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and already, very timidly back then, some Northern European, British, Dutch pension funds were saying maybe we should start investing in defense, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's not against ESG, or maybe it's not bad governance to invest in arms procurement. And the question started, and we heard some very interesting things at the IMF World Bank.